Welcome to Mormon Land, a podcast all about the news and culture of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and other Mormon faiths. I am religion reporter Tamari Kemsley, and joining me is senior managing editor David Noyce, who oversees our faith coverage. Hey, Dave.
Hi, Tamara.
Before we start, a quick ask. If you have not already, we invite you to go to patreon.com/MormonLand. That is patreon.com/MormonLand, and click on Become a Member. For as little as $3 a month, you can access all of the Tribune's faith coverage, podcast transcripts, and the full Mormon Land newsletter. Again, that's patreon.com/MormonLand. Also, we invite you, if you have not already, to go to Instagram and follow us at mormon.land. Now for today's episode. For the second time in less than 2 months, Latter-day Saint women are pushing back against a sermon delivered by one of the global church's top female leaders. Speaking on Friday at Brigham Young University's Women's Conference, President Camille Johnson, leader of the Global Relief Society of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, encouraged women to rely on the words of President Russell M. Nelson while emphasizing the need for women to prioritize motherhood. The former corporate attorney held up her own story as an example, stressing that even when she worked outside the home, her focus was on her family. For some Latter-day Saint women, this suggestion that mothers could pursue careers and still be aligned with the church's teachings on gender roles came as something of a surprise. Thousands took to the comment section of the church's Instagram account to voice their confusion, remorse, hurt, and excitement over President Johnson's remarks. Here to unpack the talk and its responses is scholar and writer Caroline Kline, Assistant Director of the Center for Global Mormon Studies at Southern California's Claremont Graduate University. She is the author of Mormon Women at the Crossroads, Global Narratives and the Power of Connectedness. Caroline, welcome.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Okay, let's just start broad. What was your initial reaction to Johnson's speech?
Well, first, an overwhelming reaction was certainly, I was very happy. I was very happy to see a Mormon woman church leader, especially our highest woman church leader, talk openly about her experience as both a mother and a career woman. That I think is a wonderful pattern. I am so happy if she can set this out as a possible path forward for Mormon women, where they don't have to feel guilty if they choose to work, if they need to work. So I thought that was very positive. And I also really liked how she focused on her own personal inspiration in making the decision to have a career. I think this is incredibly healthy, a great pattern for everyone to be listening to their own best selves, their own consciences, their own relationships with deity as they make these very personal decisions about their family structures. That's one of my reactions. Now, in terms of other feelings, I do not deny that I have mixed feelings as well, side by side with my happiness about this openness in terms of her speaking about her career. There's also a little bit of frustration, too, with what was left unsaid. And what was left unsaid in this talk was that her decision to pursue a career and motherhood simultaneously, this was back in the 80s, and she was doing this in the 90s as well, went against very clear counsel from the highest leaders of our church that told women to forego paid employment. This was very clear rhetoric outlining the dangers of mothers working, the misguided nature of mothers working, the fact that women's divine role was to be a mother in the home and not in the workforce. This rhetoric was powerful. It was pervasive. And it influenced a generation or two of women to either forego their career dreams, or if they did pursue them, to feel a certain amount of guilt doing so, even if they had to do it for financial necessity. So what was left unsaid left me a little bit troubled. And I had so many other feelings as well, which I can talk more about. I I couldn't help wondering how she metabolized these messages that I just mentioned from our church leaders. How do you get to the point as a Mormon woman where you place primacy on your own personal inspiration and decide to follow that course in the face of very clear directions to not do what she chose to do? So I admire her decision. I think it's fantastic. I want to know how she got there. So that's something I would like to know more about. I would also love it in an ideal world if there could be a clear acknowledgement that the example she's setting forth now about motherhood and career, that this is a break with what was taught in the past. I think it does no one any favors to pretend that the past wasn't the past and that this really happened and that many, many women were affected by this discourse. I can go on, Tamara, but do you want me to stop here and do you want to comment on anything?
I just have one. Do you happen to have up some of the quotes that she would have heard, perhaps? So, like, if you could give our listeners who aren't as familiar a taste of some of the language and the rhetoric of that period?
Yes,
yeah,
I do.
Caroline, I'm wondering, because I was going to ask about this too, because those messages you say came from the very top. We're talking about church presidents like Spencer W. Kimball, right? Ezra Taft Benson.
Absolutely.
Go ahead and share with what, like Tamara said, what some of what they said.
Absolutely. So this really ramped up in the 1970s in the face of the women's rights movement, when many women were moving out of their homes and into the workforce. And so what we get, one of the very famous examples from the 1970s was Spencer W. Kimball giving a talk that is now known as Mothers Come Home. And here's a quote: "Wives, come home from the typewriter, the laundry, the nursing, come home from the factory, the cafe. No career approaches in importance that of wife, homemaker, mother, cooking meals, washing dishes, making beds for one's precious husband and children." That's a very famous quote from that talk. Here's another one that I think is important. "The husband is expected to support his family, and only in an emergency should a wife secure outside home to build a home into a heaven of delight. Numerous divorces," and this is key, "numerous divorces can be traced directly to the day when the wife left the home and went out into the world, into employment." You can feel like, with that statement right there about divorce, no wonder generations of women have felt a lot of guilt and just being torn up about entering into the workforce and the possible ramifications of doing so. So this was a very famous talk in the 1970s. The thing that happens is that it gets repeated. These quotes, these incredibly powerful quotes, get repeated in 1987 by Ezra Taft Benson, where he doubles down on this idea that mothers should not be in the workplace. And it was a very disconcerting thing for many women to hear, because throughout the 80s, more and more women were working. And then to kind of hear this regressive rhetoric, it caused a lot of distress. And Levina Fielding Anderson talks about that in a dialogue article, just how many women sobbed. They were in tears. They made appointments with their bishops. They cried to their bishops. It was incredibly distressing. Many quit their jobs. Many young women decided to forego a career, and it just had lasting ramifications on Mormon women.
Do you think President Johnson didn't do enough to explain how she navigated that? You know what I'm saying? She just said she made a decision based on, she said, her personal revelation and her family. Mm-hmm. If she had somehow shown that she had some of that same kind of angst.
Oh, I think that would have gone a long ways. Mm-hmm. Openness about the reality of her experience. And I don't think I'm projecting too much to say there is no way she did not hear some of this rhetoric. She heard it. She had to have heard it. And so for her to make these decisions about her career in the face of it, I think we just need to hear more acknowledgement of the context, of the reality, of the difficulty, of the pain of this decision. I think a lot of women would have really resonated with that kind of acknowledgement, and also just with an acknowledgement that this is a change. I think the church often makes changes by simply kind of ignoring the past and then incorporating a new kind of rhetoric or a new discourse. This is a situation where I don't think that is helpful. we need to acknowledge the past. We need to acknowledge what was said. We need to acknowledge that it had lasting ramifications. And then we can acknowledge this is a new path forward, and there's no need to feel guilt anymore about having a career and motherhood.
So President Delaney jokes, who's currently in the governing first presidency and is next in line to lead the church. He was very quick to respond on Instagram. And I want to touch on the role of Instagram a little bit later and how that seems to be like factoring more into these conversations. But he was very quick to hold her up as a role model. Any thoughts or responses to that? And then as well, he himself has spoken about this issue recently. He has warned against, in speaking to single adults last year, he warned them against postponing marriage and having children. And so, what are your thoughts about this holding up, again, like a working woman as a role model, thoughts, reactions? And you kind of touched on that, but I want to unpack it specifically in the context of President Oaks. And then second, are we in a period of retrenchment on this subject?
Well, in terms of holding her up as a role model, again, like mixed feelings. Like I think she is a role model. Absolutely. A role model of a woman who listened to her own conscience and her own personal inspiration and did what she needed to do for herself and her family. This is a wonderful role model. However, that does not mean there is not a certain amount of irony in the fact that it is a woman who disregarded that very strong counsel, that very strong rhetoric against working moms and careers. She ignored that, and she carved out her own path. So she is the one who has now been elevated to the most powerful position a woman can have in the Mormon Church. And so I think that you probably saw in some of the Instagram responses, women pointing this out that, I obeyed, I stayed home, I don't have a career. But the woman who didn't obey, she is elevated now as this role model and as the most powerful woman in the church. So there is a bit of irony there with holding her up. Not that I disagree with it, but let's acknowledge the irony.
When you read those statements from Spencer W. Kimball that were repeated by and doubled down on by Ezra Taft Benson, it's hard to imagine a top church leader saying the same thing today. Mm-hmm. How has the message to women about this issue shifted or evolved through the years? And I think that cuts to Tamara's question of, is this now going back to that kind of a little bit?
Right. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So things did shift after 1987. And even during the 80s, there are various voices opining about this issue from our church leaders. And there's a gradual softening and more acknowledgement of need of women working because this is financially necessary. There's more accommodating language coming into play. And I think this really comes to fruition in the 90s under President Hinckley. And by the way, this is not to say that there weren't also simultaneously, ideas doubling down on moms staying at home. But you also have kind of Hinckley coming in, and he has a different style. He tells women in 1996 who are working, do the best you can. Like, we're with you. Do the best you can as you navigate this. He, in 2001, gives a wonderful talk, and this was really powerful for me, where he says the whole realm of human endeavor is now open to women, or the whole gamut of human endeavor is now open to women. You can do anything you want, women. And then he tells the story of a nurse who works and how he thought she had a wonderful life. So I think that was a hallmark where things are starting to shift. Not to mention, we cannot ignore the 1995 Proclamation on the Family, which does say that women's primary role is to nurture, but it gives no details as to how that comes to be. This does not preclude working. It does not preclude working. A woman can interpret nurturing, primarily responsible for nurturing, how she wants to interpret it. There is room in there for a woman to be working. And this is especially important because, of course, the church is globalizing and women are working all over the world. And they do not want to be coming out with strong statements at this point saying that women should not work. That just doesn't make any sense globally. So things are so certainly I think things really started to soften in the 90s and then throughout the 2000s. I have not heard any new in the last couple of decades. I don't think I've heard any top church leaders speak negatively about working moms. I don't know if you guys have, but I that has not jumped out at me.
And so then that question, like I said, of retrenchment, I just want to come back to that.
Yeah. It's hard to say if there's a retrenchment going on. Certainly, I think motherhood has always been held up as an ideal, throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, and before. Motherhood has always been held up as an ideal. The discourse is still around. Goodness knows if you go to church on Mother's Day, you hear it. This idealization of mothers and motherhood being next to the divine and motherhood being such an incredibly important purpose for women. I think this all persists. But what is striking is Elder Oaks's hammering down on having children early, even if you're not financially ready. The idea of birthing and birthing a lot. This to me feels like it could be a swing in the other direction. But I think what we have to do is we have to see how it plays out. Is this just Elder Oaks with President Johnson echoing him? Is this just his thing, or is this going to be picked up by other general authorities? This idea that we need to be having children, lots of them, and early, even before you feel ready. That will be something to look for.
Camille Johnson made a point in her address to talk about single women and women who can't have children or don't have children. Did she have anything new in regards to those issues and audiences to say?
Nothing struck me as new, but I did think she was remarkably sensitive. I thought she was really trying to be inclusive and really trying to be sensitive, because even as she mentions, the birth rate issue and how we need to have more babies and we need to be multiplying and replenishing the earth. I mean, she's talking like this, but at the same time, she's pairing it with I know the pain of women who can't have children, who want children. Women experiencing infertility, single women, there will be blessings for you at some point. So I think she's very aware that this rhetoric of having babies and having lots of them is by its very nature exclusionary. And so she's trying to be inclusive by acknowledging other women's pain and the fact that this cannot apply to them. It just can't. So I thought she did. I admire her for trying to be as sensitive as you can be when approaching such very sensitive and personal issues as family structure and, how many children to have.
So going back to the responses, right? We have a lot of, just from my own sort of audit, hit my mic. A little audit that I did was lots of women that tend to look to be North America, US based, right? Voicing a lot of concerns about this, lots of terms of like gaslighting, and other parlance of like the moment, right? When it comes to social and cultural debates. And I wonder if you feel like the concerns that were voiced by the women on Instagram are representative women throughout the global church, or if these are voices that are being disproportionately represented in this conversation.
Oh, that's a great question. Yes. So I was reading your article, Tamara, and I noticed, yes, you had a section on financial concerns. This was a theme, right, in the Instagram responses, that women in America generally who were commenting on this post were saying, look, I forego. I had to forego a lot of financial security because of this. Financial concerns were a theme there. And I actually think that is representative of how global women think of this issue. In Europe, it is absolutely common for both men and women to work. You need to have a pension and to not be on government welfare. It's just the way that the system is set up. Luckily, it's also set up with fabulous childcare often. For instance, in Finland, great childcare with huge maternity leave. So it's very possible to have a 2-career family. And if you don't, my Finnish friend tells me you're on government welfare if you don't have 2 people working, right? So in lots of European countries, this is just, women are going to work. In Mexico, same kind of thing. Women are women are going to work because of the economic situations. It's just not reality for many women to even consider that being a stay-at-home mom is possible. So as you go around the globe, also to Africa, working mothers are the norm. It doesn't even their sense of motherhood in no way precludes paid labor. In fact, paid labor is a part of their sense of motherhood. If you are a mom, you provide. You provision your children, you work. And so the idea of not working, it's just not even feasible. For many, like I said, for many, there are always going to be exceptions, but in general, working is going to be the norm. So certainly throughout the world, I think, yes, financial concerns absolutely make it very much the norm for mothers to be working. So I think that is an overlap with the statements that we saw in the Instagram posts. Other themes that you found in the Instagram posts. Let me look at my notes here. Did you have any kind of theme on sort of self-fulfillment? Like, I could have had a career that I would have loved, but I forewent it to be obedient. And now I'm at home and I'm 60 and I'm irrelevant and obsolete. And what did I do with my life? I wish I could go back. I mean, I read several ones like that. That is not as reflective of global women, because that is a mark of privilege. If you can connect your paid employment to self-fulfillment, that means you're working with a degree of privilege that most of the world is not working with. You know, most of the world works to survive and to eat and to be housed. And it's not something that they necessarily find a lot of joy in. So I think that is less reflective. However, there are flashes of this. I was reading an oral history with a woman from Kenya who was reacting to stay-at-home mom rhetoric, Mormon woman, and she was not a fan of stay-at-home mom rhetoric, because she said women are social animals. Like, you cannot keep them in the house. They are social animals. They need to be out there. They need to be doing things in the world. And so for her, so that tells me she was connecting it to this idea of fulfillment in some way. And she did not see, quote unquote, being a housewife as the way to go. I think that there was such a theme of regret among many of these posts. Like, I wish I had done it differently. And I don't see many global women expressing regret, because most of the global women weren't in a position to say, boy, I wish I had done it differently. I wish I had developed a career. So that would be another place where I would say there was a disconnect, because they just don't come from contexts where it's even possible to have regret about something like this.
Yeah. Hey, Caroline, can I return to another issue we've touched on a little bit, but both Sister Johnson and President Oaks voiced concerns, or President Johnson and President Oaks voiced concerns about declining marriage and birth rates. What are some of the cultural norms regarding the timing of marriage and family size that you've observed among Latter-day Saint women globally?
That's a great question. You know, I usually don't do too much macro examinations of, say, women in a particular country. So I can't see the big trends. What I can see are just kind of qualitative, interviews that were conducted as they talk about their personal lives. So in terms of global women and trends regarding birth rate, I think certainly in Europe, I think we know that birth rates are low. They go down both for Mormon women and for non-Mormon women. I think this is a trend in Europe. In terms of in America, yes, like birth rates are lowering, absolutely. But according to Timothy Heaton and some of the work he's done, even as birth rates are lowering and Mormon birth rates are lowering alongside the national ones, usually Mormons are a tick above. We're a little bit above, maybe one child above the national average, but we follow the general patterns. So as birth rates continue to drop in society, so do ours, but we're still always like a little bit ahead because we just tend to have more children. So, and I think that this is a pattern that seemed to me to be pretty, I'm really guessing here, but anecdotally, I think that this would hold true globally a lot of the time.
So you can't really speak to whether this should be a huge concern for the church or not. I mean, as far as what the numbers actually show.
I cannot
Okay.
speak to that. I think they're just kind of feeling a sense of anxiety because so many young people leave the church now. Many young people leave now. And I'm sure they don't want to see wards shuttering and stakes combining. And this is not an outcome they're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So I mentioned this earlier, and I'm coming back to this now, is that, so again, this is the second time in recent weeks that women have taken to social media, specifically Instagram, to voice concerns over a speech given by and focused on women. What do you think is happening here?
It's really interesting. Certainly, Sister Dennis hit a nerve with her talk from last month. And I don't have the quote in front of me. So if any of you do have the quote, feel free to jump in. But this post was put on Instagram that quoted her saying something like, she is, broadly speaking, she knew of no other women that had more power and authority in their church than Mormon women do. And this ignited a firestorm of responses on Instagram, with people really objecting to this quote. Now, I think what happened is that the church PR people did her no favors by taking that quote out of context. If you look at her whole quote, she does actually acknowledge she knows women in other traditions are ordained. She knows this, and she acknowledges this. But the fact that the church PR people just clipped that one little sentence without her wider context, I think really, really put people's teeth on edge. And so you had a firestorm of people saying, are you kidding me? Like, this is a very patriarchal institution. I have very little power and authority. Women can't have priesthood. Women can't be bishops. Women aren't incorporated into the most important decision-making bodies of the church in any meaningful way. There is no way women have the most power and authority of all women in churches everywhere. So I think that was a really interesting moment to see that kind of pushback, even if a lot of it, I think, was because of the particular way it was done on Instagram.
Caroline, can I ask a question about that? How can she acknowledges that other churches ordained, then how can you make that statement? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
In other words, how can you say other churches do this, but we actually have, it seems like that statement conflicts completely.
Yeah. And I think that's how it really felt to so many women.
Right.
Well, okay. So this is what I think she is thinking, and take this for what it's worth. If you consider the LDS Church to have the one priesthood authority structure that is true on the face of the earth, and if in some strange abstract way Mormon women have some call on priesthood, we haven't defined what that is. It seems to have no actual meaning in real life, but apparently Mormon women now, quote unquote, have the priesthood in some sense. This is new rhetoric, by the way, of the last few years. So if we believe that, which she does, then maybe it does make sense that Mormon women have more power and authority from God than any other church, because it's coming from the line, the authority, the priesthood line, that is the one true one on the face of the earth. So even if it's a smidgen of power and authority, it's more than perhaps other women, because
it cuts to the church's truth claims, is what you're saying, right? Yeah. No, the church's truth claims that this is the real priesthood. So, okay.
Yeah. And I also think, just really quickly, last note about that particular talk is, I think it is so fascinating that church leaders like Sister Dennis have adopted the language of feminism. Like when she's talking about women having more power and authority than any other women on earth, power and authority, this is feminist language. This is the language of liberal feminism. So it seems to me that church leaders have ceded the war when it comes to this kind of thinking, and the importance of power and authority being a good thing. Equality being a good thing. There's so much rhetoric about women as equal partners and equality in the church. We're adopting this language. We're incorporating it. We're saying we have it, and yet the actual structures are not changing. So it's a very interesting move to let's adopt the rhetoric, but let's actually not change the structures to incorporate women more fully into the systems and into the power structures. So a fascinating move. I think it's part of a trend. She's right in line with many other speakers of the last couple decades.
What do you think of women using specifically social media as a tool to petition church leaders?
I have no idea how that's working out. I'm not sure. I'm sure some of this is filtering back up to the leaders who are saying these quotes that are being featured and then being pushed back on. I honestly, I would be fascinated to know if it has any real effect. Is this going to make our leaders more careful in the future? Do they know the pain points? Are they reading the comments? Do they see where there's disconnect and where there's dissonance? Can they do better in the future because they're reading these comments and they understand where the pain points are and where the dissonance is? I am fascinated. I would love to know the answer. I do not know. I think time will tell if this actually has an effect on our leaders' rhetoric. But aside from the impact on leaders' rhetoric, I think it's fantastic that women are finding a way to voice their concerns. They're getting their opinions out. They're connecting with other women who are feeling the same thing. They're seeing they're not alone. If they've ever had this, wait, this doesn't make sense kind of feeling about various contradictory things we learn in the LDS Church, they can see that they're not crazy. Other women are seeing this. And I think that's a very, very powerful thing. And that's what social media can do. It can connect women who are sensing various dissonances and various contradictions.
We've talked about motherhood. We've talked about, Dennis's talk about women's relationship to the priesthood. So zooming out one step further, the ongoing debate and lectures about women and garments, right? That's one that's being pinned, and the concern about individuals wearing that covenant-related undergarment has been stressed, the importance of doing it daily, and specifically pinned on women. And this like yoga pants sort of phenomenon where they're like, you can't just sit around in your yoga pants. You got to wear your garments, which has always been funny to me because I'm like, could you not do both? But nonetheless, do you see these threads as related? What might be driving this focus on women and their spiritual practices, power, and roles?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. I think women's bodies are often the focus when cultures start to shift and change. Often there seems to be a microscope put on women's bodies and what they're doing with them. And so I see the crackdown on garment wearing, especially because it was aimed so specifically at women, like you mentioned. Elder Hamilton points out that he's distressed by so many younger women not only wearing them on Sundays or to the temple and then wearing yoga pants throughout the rest of the week. Like you said, like that can't. Anyway, people can do both. But anyway, this was his sense of what was happening. So clearly there was anxiety about women not wearing their garments. And then of course there's now a stricter interpretation of garment wearing that's going around. So I personally I think this is a difficult move forward for them, and maybe not the best move forward to crack down on garments, because we can't get away from the reality that garments are underwear and bodies are different, and garments work for some bodies and they do not work for other bodies, and especially bodies that are pregnant, giving birth, dealing with various infections. Garments are just going to be hard a lot of the time. And so to crack down on them is, I think, going to possibly have some more negative ramifications than positive ramifications. As women, if women feel coerced into wearing something that is really quite uncomfortable for their bodies and not doing their bodies any favors, this is just going to promote resentment. This isn't going to increase devotional feelings and behavior and loyalty to their church leaders. It's just going to make them feel dissonance. So I am worried that this will not have a good result. And I think that my colleague Nancy Ross, who talks about garments, I think she had a great idea, which is that perhaps a better move forward would be to treat garments like we treat fasting, which is, yes, it's promoted in the sense that it can lead to greater spirituality, a greater sense of God. It can be a wonderful devotional habit, but we don't crack down on it. We don't enforce it. It's up to people to decide how best to fast and how much to fast. And so I think that to me strikes me as sort of a wiser way forward, or at least one that would have less negative ramifications.
So let me posit something to you. You mentioned earlier that there's this anxiety around people leaving the faith, especially in a younger generation. Gen Reese and others have shown that there are signs that millennials, Gen Z, are less likely to stay lifelong members of the church. Do you think that some of this anxiety or some of this focus that we're seeing on women's bodies and behaviors and power is an expression of that anxiety?
Oh, yes, I definitely think so. I don't have any studies right on hand right now, but I think it's understood that families often follow the women, when it comes to church activity, and especially the children. Children often follow the mother. And if the mother is not as interested in participating in the LDS church, the chances of her children not participating also are, really, really dramatically rise. So absolutely, I think there's a lot of anxiety about how many young people the church is not retaining. It's really striking. I mean, almost any Mormon family you talk to, half the adult siblings are no longer practicing. And then if you go down a generation to people in their 20s, it's even fewer. So I have no hard numbers on me, but there is, I think, no way that our church leaders are not very anxious about this, and especially anxious about it now that women are leaving and young women are leaving. Because before, young men would leave, but often women were the more faithful that would stick with the program more. But it seems as if young women are not doing that as much as they used to.
Isn't that one reason I think the garment wearing is an odd thing to single out? In other words, presumably these are, if we're talking about women in this case, garment wearing, these are women in the church. These are women who are getting temple recommends, attending the temple, or, qualifying to attend the temple and taking part in their meetings. And you might alienate the very people that are still trying to, stick with the religion. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's why it just seems like such a dangerous move to crack down on it. You're right. The women who are wearing their garments part-time are the women that are trying to make Mormonism work. They are trying to fit it into their lives, and maybe in lots of cases, absolutely fitting it into their lives. But this is one thing where they want to have a little bit of choice and agency over, because garments are underwear and they can not work for some bodies. So yeah, I think cracking down on that is, we'll have to see how this works out, but I am not hopeful.
One final question then, based on your conversations, again, with Latter-day Saint women across the globe, what is one action do you think the church could take to make the church as a whole a place where more women feel like this is my community, I own this, right? To a more welcoming, for lack of a better word, right, place for these women globally?
Oh yeah, that's a great and huge question.
30 seconds.
Yeah. Oh, I don't even know where to start. I think that certainly the move to not be promoting stay-at-home culture like it had done in previous decades, that is a wise move and a smart move, because worldwide, it just isn't going to work, and it doesn't make sense to promote this, and it's only going to make women feel bad. So that's a positive mood. I think to focus on sisterhood is probably a rhetorical move I would make. I would probably transition away from motherhood emphases, because motherhood only applies to some women, despite what maybe some church leaders have said in the past about every woman being a mother. In truth, motherhood only applies to some women. And so if we can focus instead on sisterhood and community and helping one another, and the power of the Ward family and holding each other up, I think that would be a really good move. And not to say that sisterhood is not focused on, I think it is, but I would play up sisterhood and downplayed motherhood, just because we don't want single women and women who can't have children to feel like there's no place for them in this religious tradition. That would be an absolute tragedy.
That's fascinating. Caroline Kline, thank you so much for being with us here today. Thank you, as always, to our producer, Chris Samuels, and to Dave Noyce.